Now then, you're very welcome along to today's podcast, which was not a planned podcast. There we were, very much enjoying our bank holiday Monday when Manchester United did their thing. So fresh from David Moyes getting 9 months, way back when, Van Gaal getting 2 years, Mourinho getting 2 years, 7 months, Solskjaer making it to 1 month shy of 3 years. Erik Ten Hag in month number 30 has been told time is up, fresh from the draw with Fenerbahce on Thursday, which was a thoroughly average game of football, followed by Sunday's defeat to West Ham. The club released a statement this morning, Monday morning. Erik Ten Hag has left his role as men's first team manager. There's no talk of mutual consent. They, of course, note he won the Carabao Cup in April of 22 and the FA Cup this year. And Ruud van Nistelrooy is the interim manager of Manchester United all of a sudden. Jonathan Wilson is back with us. You're very welcome. Thank you for coming on all very last minute notice, one of those days. We last spoke on Wednesday, and I do remember asking you, how close is he, do you think, should Fenerbahce and Jose Mourinho do a number on him? How close is he to the sack? And from memory, the sense was, well, a bit of wiggle room from sack, no wiggle room from crisis. It's a constant crisis, but actually sack was very much looming.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the question is why now? Why is it worse now than it was 2 weeks ago, or 5 weeks ago, or the end of last season, or the middle of last season? What is it now that's suddenly forced their hand? Especially when you think about the actual defeat to West Ham. I mean, Solskjaer's final game, they got beaten 4-1 at Watford. When at a time when Watford were pretty bad. I mean, that was a real humiliation. That made sense. And inconvenient as this morning's decision was, given I was sitting in the opticians when the news broke, that was a lot more inconvenient because I was walking around some standing stones in the Lake District, having to try and file stuff, like just ad-libbing it on down the phone line. But losing 2-1 to West Ham on the back of a pretty dodgy penalty decision when, yeah, if you think about that game, Dalot misses that chance. There's the Fabianski save in the first half. Was that a Casemiro header? The Fabianski makes a really good save, diving away to his left. They could have been 2-0 up at half time very, very easily. They see the game out. Would he still have been sacked, or have they really made a decision because of I think one of the strange VAR calls we've seen this season? And if it is the latter, then that's just nonsense. It's all talk of long-term plans. None of it means anything. Unless they've set some very arbitrary targets of you have to have this many points after a certain number of games, and he's failed at this point. So yeah, it baffled me that he stayed on after the FA Cup final. That was a chance for him to go out with dignity, with a modicum of glory. You could even dress it up as new owners want their man in. Sorry, Erik, you've done a great job. It's not you, it's us. We just want to move on. As it is, everybody comes out of this looking terrible.
Yeah, his stock's all-time low. The timing question is interesting. Do you have any great theory as to why, out of interest?
I mean, no, to be honest, because the international break would be a logical time to do it. That gives you time to get the new man in. He can, get his feet under the desk, work out what's going on with the players who remain. There's a little bit less pressure there. But why would you do it now? I mean, maybe they've got somebody lined up who's sort of saying, yeah, look, you've got to act now because I've got this offer from Club X. But I think that was probably 2 weeks ago with Thomas Tuchel. That was my reaction when the first hints that Tuchel was talking to the FA came out were, oh, he's trying to put pressure on United. I didn't take it seriously. I thought this is just sort of an agent's way of ratcheting up the pressure. So I can't see anybody obvious waiting in the wings. I think probably, they should have gone for Pochettino at the end of last season. I don't really understand why they didn't do that. So no, I mean, maybe it's just sort of like coastal erosion that if a sea of bad news batters away at the cliff long enough, eventually the cliff does crumble.
How do you think he departs the scene, his reputation?
In an extraordinary low. The baffling thing is, how did he get that Ag side to play so well? Because there hasn't been a hint of that at United. You could say that about a lot of players on that side as well. What was it that made that Ag so good? because yeah, Frankie De Jong hasn't gone on to be what we thought he might be. Donny van de Beek certainly hasn't. David Neres certainly hasn't. Matthias de Ligt, is not fulfilling that. Andre Onana doesn't look the player he did there. Um, so that increasingly looks like just a freak that for whatever reason, almost a bit like the Leicester season, that lots of players had their greatest season and a manager had his greatest season all at the same time. It led to great things, but it wasn't sustainable. But I mean, Ten Hag, he'll have sympathy because everybody knows that United is a basket case. But my instinct with United managers is always initially to have sympathy, um, while acknowledging they made some really strange appointments. So Solskjaer probably the most inexplicable in terms of football leadership. I understand why there's an emotional reason to appoint him, but in terms of looking at his past record and what he might do, that was the one that makes no sense. Mourinho as well in a different way. Ten Hag made some kind of sense. He did seem like a bright manager, not that young, but certainly still on the way up. He didn't have a huge amount of first team experience, but what he had at Ajax had been very, very good. I think even then there was some slight doubts about what he'd done with Bayern's reserve teams. But you sort of think, Bayern's was, these countries where the reserve teams and the big teams play in the lower leagues, it's always a bit of a funny setup. You never quite know what he's competing with, what the internal pressures are. So maybe we don't take that too seriously. But it's very hard to look at what Ten Hag's done at United and see any coherence. The only consistency is that they've consistently been not very good. They've been the odd little false dawns, the odd good performance, but they're few and far between. And that sense you had in the first season of, look, it's a mess, but he's slowly putting it right. When he bombed out Cristiano Ronaldo, he had the side play a system I think he didn't really want to play because of De Gea. Then he gets rid of De Gea. You think all of that makes sense. And now he's just been given an enormous amount of money to buy his players. A lot of the time, players who literally played for him at Ajax or players he knew very well from the Eredivisie. And none of it has worked at all.
Yeah, it's hard to overly defend any of it, really. There was a point in the 22-23 season where you thought maybe something is just starting to happen here a touch. They finished third in the league, albeit some other usual contenders were having a bad year, but they finished third in the league nonetheless. They got to an FA Cup final and they won the Carabao Cup. And it was around the time they won the Carabao Cup that Casemiro had arrived and was in what turned out to be an unreliable burst of form. That he kind of thought, God, he's getting to grips with things. And obviously last year, it fell apart again. They finished eighth in the league. They won the FA Cup, which ultimately saved his job. But the level of performances last year were truly awful. There were numerous games, Spurs at home, akin to actually the Spurs game at home a couple of weeks ago, where a new manager in Postecoglou had a team playing just amazingly coherent and vibrant football, and United were still a mess. And obviously, Ten Hag was not a new manager, and that was kind of, it was just worrying all the way through last season. And I suppose that's, I don't know, you couldn't have sympathy for him losing his job, but you said, God, if it had ended last year with FA Cup glory, there's a degree of kind of, it's not so humiliating. You really have to you really have to kind of ask of Ineos, like what was the thinking here? It was just so patently bad last year. It was just so obviously not working. The performances were terrible. Like if you sack a manager at the end of a bad season, it's the manager's fault. If you sack a manager 9 league games into a new season, that's your fault. They've made a complete mess of this situation. And that's without mentioning the very public interviewing of I don't know how many potential candidates over the summer.
Oh, you think of the cost of it. I mean, not just in terms of what his payoff presumably is. I mean, maybe they were smart enough to introduce some break clause, but to give him a new contract at the end of last season, logically that should cost more. But also just a number of players they've signed for him. I mean, it's signed what, £150 million for the player, who are, they don't look like players who've been spat out by the Ineos algorithm. They're the same sort of players they've been signing, which is people who've played in the Netherlands or are Dutch or have some kind of Dutch connection. Mazraoui, Xerxes, De Ligt. So just the whole thing just seems so wasteful. And it's also so predictable. Yeah. I mean, who thought on the Monday morning after the FA Cup final, Ten Hag will still be in this job at Christmas? Nobody, did anybody think that? I mean, maybe Dave Brailsford thought that. Um, yeah, I mean, this season, for the last month, 6 weeks, it's felt like they're just sort of stretching this out as long as possible, almost to save face. But it's bad enough sacking him after 9 weeks, but it would have been worse to sack him after four. Um, and you think of I mean, that defeat at home to Spurs was the really bad game. That was where they looked genuinely atrocious. But I remember in that game at half time, got a message from a United supporting mate saying, "Is this our worst 45 minutes under Ten Hag?" And then between us, in the next 5 minutes, we listed about a dozen that were just as bad. Yeah, there've been a lot of these. Yeah, the Brighton game, they're a little bit unlucky, but then the two goals you could see, they're just such a mess. Just players not doing the basics. And that I think is whoever comes in is going to have this problem. But and you look at that squad, who really do you want to keep? Um, Bruno Fernandes, I think, continues to sort of drag them up to even the level they're at. I think his overperformance in that first season was one of the reasons why it did look like things were working. And I admit that I thought in that first season that they were on the right path. I thought they found in Ten Hag the person who could drag them forwards. I remember talking to Mark Langdon from the Racing Post, and he was saying, "Oh yeah, but they've had a lot of one-goal victories. I don't know if you can trust that." And in retrospect, he was absolutely right. Whereas I was seeing the positive of it. He's getting results despite not playing that well. Actually, the issue was they weren't playing that well. Casemiro, as you said, came in, had a very good start. Rashford's had odd streaks where he's got 20 goals in 20 games, which has helped them out. But apart from that, and even Rashford now, I'm not sure if somebody came in with a reasonable offer, who would really be upset at United if he went. Look at the rest of the team. I don't think United fans would be particularly upset if any of them went. Even Bruno Fernandes, because he's such a kind of weirdly moany, prickly figure.
Mm.
I'm not sure many people would be that upset, even though I think he is very obviously by far their best player. I mean,
We
Garnacho,
had,
I guess now has sort of started to,
he's starting to, yeah.
but
With
even
Damien,
he's very in and out, and he was a kid. There's too much pressure. Kobe Mainu, yeah, Kobe Mainu should not have been as exposed as he is. He's obviously
mm,
got, sorry, excuse me, obviously has enormous potential. But you can't expect an 18-year-old to run a midfield. It's just not realistic. He should be being brought in occasionally. You compare his development to, say, Phil Foden's, and the overexposure Mainoo's had, where, compared to the way the Foden was very slowly drip fed in to a point where in his first full season, he looked like the best player in the league. Well,
yeah.
Kobe Mainoo, some of his positional indiscipline, and I don't blame him for that. That's not really a criticism. He's 18. You're meant to be indisciplined as an 18-year-old. It'd be weird if you weren't. But some of that has really been exposed and exposed United, and I just hope he hasn't been too scarred by it.
Mm. We had Damien Delaney on a couple of weeks ago, and he was explaining in great detail just how complex it is to sell these players and the compensation that they will want. They'll want their contracts paid up, and it ends up costing gargantuan sums. And it does, you referenced the 150 million sterling over the summer. And to be fair, Ten Hag has been backed right the way through financially. They've kind of built a new team here. There's sort of, if all of these signings had worked, they would be at the end point of, God, we've got a new team here, and it's nicely bedded in for the next 2, 3, 4 years, depending on contract lengths. So trying to rip that up and start again is just, I mean, it's going to be 3, 4, 5 years before they get to another new team, because they're just not going to be able to sell so many of these players.
Yeah, and selling I think is a big problem these days because other countries outside the Premier League do not have the wealth of the Premier League. And selling on the way down is obviously much harder.
Hmm.
But there's no, even in the Saudi Pro League is not what it was 2 years ago in terms of the amount of money they're splashing about. So I'm sure Casemiro can be farmed out to the Saudi Pro League if he wants to go. I don't know.
Hmm.
And I'm sure he's a big enough name that somebody there would be happy to take him. I don't think Christian Eriksen would get that type of gig. I don't think De Ligt would. I talked about selling De Ligt already. He's only been there half a dozen games, but already looks way out of his depth. Um, Rashford maybe is a big enough name to attract the Saudi Pro League, but I can't. In terms of Premier League clubs, where the cash is, who's going to be in for any of these players? I mean, maybe
You know.
maybe you could flog Mainoo to Chelsea, but that's the last thing you want to do. So I think it's going to be really hard for them.
Yeah, I would think so. So, do you have a hunch as to uh, where Ten Hag failed? I mean, he never struck me as a particularly inspirational figure, and I guess he was hired because on the back of Ajax, we thought, well, here's some cutting edge tactical acumen, which would be to the fore, and that never happened either. And
Mm.
the continual mystery at Manchester United is why they never seem to have any style of play under any manager. You know, nobody can either communicate it to them, or else they're just not receptive, or something's going on there. What's your hunch as to where Ten Hag fell down here?
I mean, I think there are a number of things. So I think he's not the first manager to find, or first
Yeah.
player even, first figure from Ajax to find it. You step outside the Ajax bubble. Same as to Barcelona to an extent. It's such a specific environment where everything is so geared to doing things in the same way, and it's been done that way with fairly minor modifications for 50 years, 60 years. And stepping outside of that, I think people can find very difficult. Um, it's a bit like, and maybe this is a very English example, but somebody who's been to a very traditional public school suddenly gets to university, and all the sort of customs and systems and rules and protocols you thought you understood, it turns out they don't apply in the rest of the world, and you go off the rails a bit. And yeah, I think that can happen. I think he's a really bad communicator.
Yeah.
And the first year or so, I thought, "Oh, it's just as English isn't as good as a lot of, as you sort of expect from Dutch people, maybe unfairly. Um, but then you sort of think, actually, it's not the communication in the sense of he's not using the right words, or he's struggling to express himself clearly. What he's saying is just nonsense. So, yeah, the whole thing about De Ligt, the Brentford game, it was dried blood. Well, it wasn't. It was, you could see it dripping off him. Like, it's not dry. Even if it is dried, players running around with dried blood on them, that's not good. Um, the whole thing last season about, I don't mind if the opposition has 25 chances a game. I mean, you must surely. Like, that's nonsense. Clearly, that's nonsense. Like, just to take a hypothetical, Eric, which is better for the opposition to have 25 or 24 chances in a game? 24, 23, 23 or 22, 20, it's just so obviously nonsense. Then, his stuff about fairy tales and lies. Well, yeah, it looks now like he was the one believing the fairy tales and lies. So yeah, let's call it communication for one of a. I can't work out what else that is, but he said some really weird stuff which has not inspired confidence, and I'm always wary of journalists talking too much about press conferences. Press conferences don't really matter. However, you think if he's like that with us, what is he like with the players?
Yeah.
I mean, I heard from a, how can I put this? From a player who's on the fringes at United, let's say, recently, that training sessions are just a shambles. Nobody listens to him. They sort of just do their own thing, which makes sense. But yeah, you look at how they play, and you hear that, and those two things seem entirely congruent.
It's anytime you get a glimpse of information like that from behind the scenes, it can be, and I'm not just talking soccer, like a whole range of sports, it can actually be really surprising just how much a shambles things are behind the scenes, and how much unprofessionalism reigns. And I think actually that's where Ineos have to take massive blame or share of blame for this season, because they so publicly recruited. I mean, they killed him. He was done. And it was very telling. Jamie Redknapp was on Sky a couple of weeks ago after yet another one of these defeats. It might have been the Liverpool game, possibly, might have been the Spurs game, take your pick. And he must have come back to it 3, 4, 5 times. And this is a guy who knows dressing rooms and knows what they smell like and grew up in them and lived his whole life in them. And he just kept coming back to a single point that they killed him. He just kept saying they killed him over the summer. Trust me, he was done. And so that tallies with them. Like, why would I listen to this guy? He's done. It's over. And I almost think Ineos, maybe, I don't know, maybe cyclists are a more diligent bunch, or their experience of Ben Ainsley is a different personality type. But it struck me as like such a naive thing to do. It just showed such a lack of understanding of how a cutthroat dressing room works. It is a bear pit, and you just killed your leader in front of them. There's no coming back from this.
Yeah. I mean, I wonder if in cycling, if the hierarchy within the team is so much more clear that it's somehow less of an issue. That as long as your sort of one or two star riders sort of buy into it, the domestics go along with it because they have to just serve those riders.
Possibly, yeah.
Maybe that is it. But I mean, it's not beyond the wit of man to kind of understand that if you have a dressing room of 15, 20 players of whom, let's say, 12 to 18 have very big egos, that they're going to be thinking, like, come on, we thought this guy was on the way out. Then we went and beat City for you. And our reward for beating City is that we have to stick with them another 2 or 3 months. Come on.
Hmm.
And I think modern players are, and this I think is where I do have some sympathy for Ten Hag. I think modern dressing rooms generally are quite toxic's maybe the wrong word, but players are out for themselves. Players have very limited loyalty to the club. You know, if some players do, but the vast majority of players they're mercenaries, and that's the modern game. You can't blame them for it. The clubs treat them in the same way. If a club's on a downward spiral, they're looking to get out, and that's just how it is. Then they're jockeying for their own position. That is the modern world. But I think United is a particularly difficult dressing room, partly because they have had such failure over the last 11 years that they know, this guy's an idiot. Give it a couple of years and or give it 18 months and he'll be out and the next bloke will be in and maybe he'll be better.
Let's finish then on what next. So, if you're looking for bookmaker odds on next manager, Ruud van Nistelrooy is the man in possession, and he's the favorite. Xavi is second favorite. Ruben Amorim is third. Southgate fourth, and then there's a a suspicion that Nagelsmann will jump ship and Klopp can exercise his German national team clause post haste. I mean, how could you not? I suppose I jumped onto Rio Ferdinand's live YouTube vlog about the situation, and he figured that because Van Nistelrooy was a ruthless finisher, that what Manchester United need is a ruthless manager, and we should give it to Ruud. He didn't quite say he was at the wheel, but I feel that's only 1 to 2 wins away from happening. Like that, so it's just like, oh, this whole circus now where all of Ruud Van Nistelrooy's former teammates are in the media. Will Ineos fall? Will whatever kind of weird, they beat Manchester City. The fans were so into it, like this kind of stuff, which isn't real but is real. Are they going to get sucked into this now? Ruud beats Chelsea on Sunday. He's ruthless. He knows the DNA. And before you know it, here we go again.
Well, yeah, this is nonsense. This is nonsense.
After Ineos's behaviour this summer, I don't actually think anything is off the table.
It's possible they believe it, but if ruthless finishing is what makes a ruthless manager, why was Dixie Dean never a great manager? Where's Robbie Fowler's managerial career? Where's Michael Owen's managerial career? Where's Ian Rush's managerial career? Where's Jimmy Floyd Hasselbaink? Well, Jimmy Floyd Hasselbaink tried to be a manager, to be fair.
No, but it's also he understands the fabric of the club.
Look, I think if he starts well, he'll be a very attractive candidate. He's there, but I don't have to go out and actually interview somebody and appoint them this time. His record in the Netherlands was okay, not outstanding, but it was fine. He has got some experience as a first team coach.
I know. Sorry, I have to interrupt you. Like, so what are we both doing here? They can't give it to Ruud van Nistelrooy. Like, I'm just messing bringing up Rio. If he wins the next 5 games in a row, they shouldn't give it to him.
I mean, I don't think they should, but I can see the attraction in doing it. I mean, of course, that makes their own behaviour look even worse. Well, maybe that's not how they see it. They think, we've done this well. We've brought in the replacement early. We're not interviewing on the fly. We've already got him in place. No, I mean, I think the bookmakers are right. I think he probably is the favourite at the minute. He's a man in possession. If he does win 4 or 5 games in a row, or even if they play well in those games, that may be enough because there's other candidates. I mean, Xavi, come on, like Xavi in the Premier League would not work. Xavi, I think we saw at Barcelona. I mean, look at what's happened to Barcelona since Xavi left. it turns out if you stop trying to play the football of 15 years ago and preaching like that's the one true doctrine and you can't deviate from that faith, and you start actually being slightly more direct and being prepared to win games with 39% possession, turns out you can beat Bayern 4-1. You can go and beat Real Madrid 4-0. Playing possession football from 15 years ago, not even in the league that Xavi would not. I mean, look, I'd love to see it because it'd be hilariously terrible.
Yeah.
And this is something that we should not underestimate. We've heard clubs regularly now talking about football as content, and let's be honest, Manchester United is the best content in the Premier League at the moment. It's better content than Arsenal, Liverpool, or City because it's this great soap opera. I think
Well,
getting rid of Ten Hag is it's like Conan Doyle killing off Sherlock Holmes. Are they going to come to regret that and have to bring him back from bottom of like back falls? Erik Ten Hag and Manchester United, in utilitarian terms, are spreading the most joy and the most entertainment to the most people. It's the greatest entertainment franchise out there. It's better than Marvel, and they've killed that. So the next installment has to be good.
Well, then what could be more entertaining than bringing in Gareth Southgate?
I mean, almost anything.
Do you think there's anything though? I dare say you're right about that toxic dressing room. Like if Southgate has an MO, it's culture, and I suspect that would play very well with Brailsford, obviously. But I would hear that. I'd be curious to hear them teasing that out. I mean, maybe the thing is so toxic to begin with, it may need someone like Southgate with a cutting edge coach with them to try and tidy something very broken up in there,
Yeah, but Barney Money wrote a really interesting piece on that towards the end of last season. And I think it was typical Barney provocation rather than necessarily what Barney believed. But I read it and sort of came out thinking, actually, maybe Southgate would be the right person because he would calm everybody down and he is this sort of statesman-like figure. And then you sort of remember, but tactically he's not great at thinking on his feet. And that was a job Steve Holland was meant to be doing for England. And it didn't really work. And if you got this sort of very astute tactician to come in, well, just give him the job. I suppose Juan Leo does something similar to that for Guardiola, but I don't really think that works. I think if you are that good as a tactician, you want to do the job yourself. Leo, I guess Leo's 64, I think. Mid-60s anyway, so maybe that great desire to be the number one has sort of faded him, and he obviously has a long-term relationship with Guardiola that they've worked together before, they know each other very well. That's maybe slightly different. I mean, my understanding of the Southgate situation is that there was a lot of talk about him being close to United before, that Brailsford really favoured him.
Yeah,
I'm not sure there's any serious contact there, so I think it may well be true that Brailsford liked the idea of it. But I don't, and maybe that was just respect from being the England coach, and maybe that would be different now. But I don't think that was ever as close or as imminent as was suggested at some points during the summer.
Okay. So you suspect possibly it will end up being a Solskjaer-esque Van Nistelrooy gets off to a good start, give it to him situation.
Yeah, I mean that seems that seems likely. It seems that they're doomed to kind of follow in these patterns. I mean. They could go for Amorim or Jardim or Fonseca or one of his other sort of great crop of Portuguese coaches, none of whom ever seem quite to be given the top job. And that's clearly the way that the City appear to be looking if Guardiola is leaving. So maybe that'll happen, maybe that'll work. Nagelsmann, I mean, do you really want to give up the chance of managing this Germany at the World Cup? I would see to go to United as well. That would seem very odd to me.
Yeah.
But I mean, the thing is, they've waited so long with this. The two obvious candidates who would I think have been good, Pochettino and Tuchel, have gone. They're not there anymore. Thomas Frank, maybe. I think that's a not unrealistic avenue. But again, is he really going to want to leave Brentford to go? I mean, that's a mess United are in. It seems plausible to say that no, he'd probably rather stay at Brentford because
come on now. I think if they want Thomas Frank, they'll get Thomas.
That's probably true, but I think Thomas Frank then is thinking, well, you've got to give me enough money that if I work for you for 6 months and never work again because my reputation is so shattered that's okay. I can live with that.
Yeah, well, that's fair. Listen, we've taken up more than enough of your time, and thank you so much for coming on at short notice. I will leave you alone for several days at least, Jonathan Wilson. Thank you so
Cheers.
much.
Thank you.
Cheers. The great Jonathan Wilson there with us back again more quickly than we had anticipated. So that is the news. Erik Ten Hag is no more at Old Trafford. Not terribly surprising, I think it's fair to say. Look elsewhere in your feed, you'll see what was meant to be our sole bank holiday offering today, an interview with Johnny Doyle, who at 47 years of age stepped down from playing, retired from playing with Alan Wood. Obviously, Kildare is gone several years now, but stopped playing with Alan Wood as of last month. Senior Kildare football, by the way. He wasn't hanging out in the intermediates or the juniors. So 47 years of age, he has called it a day with Alan Wood. We had a great chat with him. That's waiting for you. And I guess we'll see you tomorrow. So the plan, I think, was to do a Not the Monday panel on a Tuesday, which I think we'll still do. There's no point doing further. Ten Hag has been sacked coverage now. You've had Jonathan. So we'll do panel tomorrow. And then really looking forward to it. Paul McGinley is going to pop into studio. He's back in Dublin. So Paul McGinley is going to come in for a big sit-down interview, which we'll bring you tomorrow as well. So keep an eye out for that. We will talk to you then. Thanks, everyone. Bye.